Thank you both Cheng, Leong and Siti. Can I just invite the both of you to the sofas on stage for a very short Q&A session. Similarly to the previous sessions, if you have any questions, please approach the mic in the middle of the auditorium. I think both our speakers, our mixed doubles pair, has really taken a couple of questions. We have, say, about 10 minutes for this. Any questions?
My name is Steve Chan, not from any sporting association. My question is to Mr. Foong. Your example of Wayne Rooney, domain name, WayneRooney.com. If the person wasn't Bill Marshall, his name was actually Wayne Rooney, would the decision be different?
Yes.
Are you saying that you will still be transferred back to Wayne Rooney?
Well,
if I'm Wayne Rooney.
Yes. If you're Wayne Rooney and your name is the same with the footballer, may not transfer, you know. There was another case regarding Veronica against Veronica. So it's Archie Comics against this domain name veronica.org. If you're not aware who Veronica is, Veronica is a character in the Archie comic. So what happened is that her father actually registered the domain name veronica.org for the daughter whose name was Veronica. So Archie Comic came for the domain name and said, this is our character's domain name and we want it back. So in this dispute, the father won because it was a genuine registration by them. One thing you can look at is whether it was done in good faith or not. In that Wayne Rooney case, that person did it in bad faith. So that is how there's a test to go through when deciding whether domain name was done properly or not.
Any other questions? Last call, I think, yeah, Mr. Allen.
My name is Alan. I'm from Squash, Malaysia. I think my question you did not cover actually. You were supposed to speak a bit on GST, right? We were told by our previous treasurer and accountant that we will be affected a lot by GST because we need to pay the GST. From your understanding, can you explain to us how it affects us directly as an association, firstly, and how does it affect the players as well, in terms of grants from the government, funding for the tournaments, and so on and so forth?
Hello? Well, essentially, GST is a consumption tax. And in instances whereby when we receive consumption of goods and services, we have to pay GST on the goods and service that we receive. Okay? In instances whereby, for associations, if you hit the threshold of 500,000, you need to be GST registered. If you hit that threshold and you don't register for GST, that's an offense under the GST Act. Okay? But in an instance whereby your turnover does not hit that 500,000 threshold, you're not required to be GST registered. There's, of course, advantages and disadvantages to being registered and not registered. In an instance whereby you are GST registered, it's a big advantage simply because for the services that you receive as an association, you have to pay GST for that service or the goods that you receive. If you are GST registered, you get to claim what is known as input tax credit. So for the 6% that you pay for the service, the taxable supply that you make to, say, for example, the players or whoever it is that you make taxable supplies to, you have to charge GST on that. You get to set off the tax that you paid and the tax that you receive. So the balance sum, if there is a difference in the positive, you basically subtract the two. The difference, you remit it to the customs. So say, for example, you pay 6 ringgit for the service that you receive, And to your to the recipients who you give supply to, you say, for example, charge, maybe the GST comes up to 10 ringgit. So your output, you minus that against your input, the balance of 4 ringgit, you remit it to customs. Okay? With players, it would be an instance, it's like with any consumer. For whatever goods and service that you receive, you have to pay for GST, unfortunately. The question arises as to whether the supply that you make to your recipients, say for example, an association, or let's just say, with a simpler example I can come up with, let's just say you're in the business of selling sports goods. And in the business of selling the sports goods, I'm GST registered, yeah? So I have to charge GST on the supply that I make to my customers. Then you get the money from the customers. Okay? So you get GST that that the customers pay to you. For the supply that you receive from the top, let's just say your manufacturers, they sell you the goods. You've already paid GST to your manufacturers. You get to set off the GST that you paid between you and your manufacturer, and the GST paid between you and your customer. So the balance that you receive, you then remit it to customs. If it's in the negative, then customs pays you money. You know? That's the scenario. With individuals, unfortunately, it's not an instance whereby, oh, I don't want to pay GST. If your contract between you and your supplier says that you will be the party paying GST for the supply, you have to pay GST. Okay? The difference is essentially whether or not your supply, the supply that you make, is exempt, is an exempt supply, or a zero-rated supply. So in that instance, the supply that you make, if you're an exempt, if your supply is exempt, then you cannot charge GST on the supply that you make. If it's zero-rated, you also cannot charge GST, is 0%, but you get to take advantage of your input tax credit. With exempt supplies, you can't take advantage of input tax credit. I hope I didn't confuse people with that explanation. But did that address your query to a certain extent?
You addressed it in the business sense of it.
All right.
The fact is, most associations, we are not in the business technically.
Okay.
Like the national team would have coaches.
Okay.
Who provide training for the athletes.
Right.
Now we get a grant from the government to employ these coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens to that grant? Is that how does that work now with GST? In that sense, you understand? We get sponsorship
Right.
for tournaments.
Right. Yes.
To run a tournament.
Yes.
Then we have to run the tournament and so on. Now, yes, that can be considered a service, running the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not profit.
Right.
So does GST apply in that sense? And when somebody pays an entry fee, we have to charge the 6% GST to them.
Right. Right.
How does that work?
Okay. You can only charge GST to your entrance or whoever it is that's attending your activity, if you are GST registered. If you're GST registered, you must charge GST. No two ways about it, unless the supply that you make falls within the zero-rated or exempt supply category. In an instance whereby your supply does not fall within that category, the organizing events and whatnot, and you would charge ticket costs or tickets which needs to be purchased, that will attract GST. With grants and whatnot, I don't see the GST impact at this point in time, because that's money that is given to you by the government for you to use. But I don't see the GST impact there at this point in time. Maybe I'll need to look into it in further detail, but at the moment I don't see GST impact. With associations, as I mentioned, if your revenue hits that 500,000 threshold, you have to get yourself GST registered. If it doesn't, then you don't need to. But once you are in that GST registered category, you have to ensure that your systems are updated, in the sense that you now have to start issuing tax invoices for the supply that you make. So with the tickets, let's say for example you sell tickets for the events that you organize, you have to now issue a tax invoice, which basically states the value of the supply, the 6% GST payable, there's other items that needs to be in that particular invoice as well. Okay, so that's the impact that will be on you if you have to be GST registered. And of course, then you can take advantage of the input-output tax scenario, whereby you get to claim against the output tax that you receive. But if, say for example, your revenue does not hit that 500,000 threshold, you can still volunteer to be GST registered because there are advantages to being GST registered. Of course, that just means that in terms of compliance costs, you have to fork out a bit more because you need to file in your returns once every few months to the customs. Yeah. You now have to start issuing tax invoices for the supply that you make. So with the tickets, let's say for example you sell tickets for the events that you organize, you have to now issue a tax invoice, which basically states the value of the supply, the 6% GST payable, there's other items that needs to be in that particular invoice as well. Okay, so that's the impact that will be on you if you have to be GST registered. And of course, then you can take advantage of the input-output tax scenario, whereby you get to claim against the output tax that you receive. But if, say for example, your revenue does not hit that 500,000 threshold, you can still volunteer to be GST registered because there are advantages to being GST registered. Of course, that just means that in terms of compliance costs, you have to fork out a bit more because you need to file in your returns once every few months to the customs.
Alright, I think we have time to squeeze in one more very quick question. Anybody? If there isn't, I would just like to invite Mr. Richard Wee to the stage, just to present a token of appreciation to Mr. Foong Leong and Ms. Siti Sharom. Thank you very much, Mr. Foong Leong and Ms. Siti Sharom, for their very informative talk. Next up.